Hi, you all. My name is Emily Jones, and I'm a Pilates teacher and body worker and dancer. And today I want to share a few tips with you about running. For a long time, I couldn't run because it hurt my back, it made my hip flexors tight, it made my calves tight. And over the past few years, I've been really cultivating the tools to be able to run well in a way that feels good in my body, that feels like it's not breaking things down or making me super sore or uncomfortable. And I just want to share those with you. Running has been awesome during this time of isolation where it's a little bit harder to stick to our normal movement routines. It's been a really nice way for me to get outside and get some endorphins going and get a little bit sweaty. So my first running tip is that running is a forward fall where your legs are trying to catch up to your torso. So leaning into the direction that you're going with your body. I'll show you what I mean by this. So leaning versus trying to run with your spine upright. If I'm trying to stay upright, then I am using a lot more of the musculature through my back to try to hold my spine vertical, and I'm using my hip flexors a lot more to kind of pull my torso along with my legs. Whereas if I can lean with my torso, then I actually get to relax my hips, my hip flexors and quads a little bit. I get my glutes to turn on a little bit more, and I have less tension through my spine. So all good things. That brings me to tip number 2, which is when you're running, you want to land more on the balls of your feet. And this will be slightly different for everyone depending on your sort of mobility, elasticity through your Achilles tendons and through your plantar fascia. So a lot of people wear these tennis shoes that have a bigger heel on them. I think that it's not a bad idea to transition gradually to shoes that are a bit more minimal. But if you've been wearing shoes for your entire life that have a heel, then you really need to take time with that transition and do some strengthening and stretching along the way. I won't get into that too much right now, but what I'm getting to is that when we're running, if we have a big heel on our shoe, then it's much easier to kind of slam your heel down into the ground. But if you imagine not having that heel, you probably would want to land more softly onto the ball of your foot. And you would want to use that elasticity through your Achilles tendon and through your plantar fascia to absorb shock and to create this recoil that allows you to push off again. So there's a little bit more of a bouncy quality to the running rather than kind of slamming down. So a nice way to practice this is just with a little baby run, which is just getting your feet and ankles going, landing more on the balls of your feet, and starting to feel that bounciness. Sometimes I'll do this for a block or two before I really get going. So that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is moving your spine when you're running. So this is really important. Sometimes I've heard people say, lock your spine or hold your torso still as you run. And I really don't think that this is a good idea. Our spines are meant to move. The movement in our spines is what allows us to absorb shock and to generate a lot of momentum and force. So in running, we have this contralateral movement happening, meaning that your torso is, your ribs, your thoracic spine, is twisting one direction as your pelvis is twisting the other direction. And this makes sense. This is true in walking too. as we step, we start to rotate our thoracic spine towards our front leg as our pelvis is rotating a little bit away. And then as we step again, we rotate towards that front leg. Again. So we have these myofascial trains, one in front. This is the little X is what it's sometimes called. Two halves coming from serratus, external obliques, internal obliques, hip flexors, quads. And then we also have the one in back, which is lats, lumbar fascia, glute, and then down into your hamstrings. And as we do this contralateral motion, we're also creating this tension in these myofascial slings that can then be released. So it's another way of sort of recycling energy rather than trying to hold everything still and use your limbs to pull your torso along. We want to let the torso move to create locomotion. So this is really great to practice just in walking. As you step 1 foot forward, you feel this part of the X shortening as this part of the X is lengthening. And then there's this moment of transition when the other foot comes forward. Now this is shortening as this is lengthening. And of course you won't feel probably the elasticity so much if you're doing a slow walk, but as you start to speed that up in running, it becomes more noticeable. Okay, so that brings me to tip number 4, and I will say this one's a little bit more complicated. That's thinking about how your femur bones, your upper leg bones, are moving as your legs are swinging. And this kind of ties together that torso rotation and the ways that you're landing on your feet. So, as our leg comes forward, there's just a little bit of outward rotation, external rotation, and as our leg goes to the back into extension, there's a little bit of internal rotation. So external rotation and internal rotation. And this is pretty small, and it's going to be a little bit different for each person's anatomy, so it might take some time to kind of find where your sweet spot is. This is important so that as we're landing, when we're running, coming onto one leg, we don't want to be landing with our knee in an inward rotation, compromised position. Of course, we also don't want to be way out to the side, so finding that sweet spot for you. If we have that little bit of external rotation, as our foot lands, we'll be just a little bit more towards the pinky toe side. And then as you start to push off from that leg, you'll go a little bit more towards your big toe side. So we have this sort of receptive side of our foot, pinky toe side, and then the propulsive side of our foot, our big toe side. And it's nice to practice just sort of the push-off motion from the big toe and come to like a mini lunge, and again find just a little rock here. Another nice pre-running exercise. Yeah, that's tip number 4. So making sure that there's a little external rotation as your leg comes forward and you land, and then as you push off, there's a little bit of an internal rotation. This sort of relates to the movement in your pelvis, right? So if you're using your counter rotations, then your front leg here is outwardly rotated, and my torso is coming towards my front leg. My pelvis is going a little towards my back leg, and my back leg internally rotates. And then I come through, and this whole chain of events reverses. So now I'm leaning a little towards my front leg, my pelvis is counter rotating, and then my leg is internally rotating as it comes through. Like I said, that one's a little more complicated, so feel free to write me, ask questions, come to a class. I'm happy to chat more. So my final tip for running, which is actually kind of two tips, is to mix up what running is. So if you live in a really flat neighborhood with lots of concrete, like I do, I would recommend trying to get to some place where you have options for terrain, for hills, and also for different ground surfaces. So running on different terrains will give you different engagement through your whole body. It will work different muscle groups versus running on a flat terrain. Running on ground that is concrete is one, not as absorbent for shock, but also it doesn't provide as much stability challenge through your feet, ankles, knees. So running on uneven surfaces, dirt, grass, bark chips, gives you just a little bit more of an option to work on stability through all your joints. Again, sort of challenging your muscles and myofascial structures in different planes, different directions. So the final part of tip number 5 is to mix up your running. So we often think of running as just this forward motion, but I like to think of running as anything where you're moving through space, anything where you're locomoting. So kind of being creative is fun. Like, can you create little obstacle courses for yourself as you run? Maybe doing things sideways like grapevine, I'll show you that in a second, or skipping, or jumping, adding little different movements in. I'll show you a couple here. So this is the grapevine one. Really nice way to get the twist going through your spine. I also like to just run sometimes in a non-linear pattern. Skipping. Doing any little sort of jumps. So really challenging your body in different directions. And that will also help you not fatigue one muscle group too much. Okay, that last one's fun because you get some weird looks from your neighbors too, which is cool. That's all for today. Thanks so much for listening to this. I want to credit just a few people who have helped me along this running path, or people or sort of organizations. So I've been studying the Axis syllabus for a long time, and a lot of these anatomical cues and directions are coming from that research. Particularly Sebastian Grubb is a person who has done a lot of teaching and training, and he's a trainer, and I've learned a lot of this from him. And also Katie Bowman, Nutritious Movement. I have been certified as a Stop Pilates teacher for about 10 years, so definitely some information from there as well. Yeah, there's probably more. All right, that's all for today. Thanks, you all.